I think we're really privileged to be here today because she's one of the global leaders in land systems science, thinking of land changes as a very integrated system, which includes people and the landscape, both from an ecological, hydrological, social, political, institutional lens. And has worked across the world in Africa, Latin America, and South Asia, and of course, Europe. So I think it's a great pleasure to have Christine. And she's talking about a very important topic for us. We're all talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, which we have to reach by 2030. Will we reach them? But more importantly, what happens after 2030? With that, I'll turn it over to you, Christine.
My warmest thanks, dear Harini, for your very warm welcome. And also my warmest thanks to all of you being here today and hopefully discussing afterwards a little bit about the perspectives in sustainability. So I want to speak a little bit about sustainable development, the time after, and how to proceed, particularly in science. And what you see here, unfortunately, I didn't find the reference again, but I liked very much that picture that shows us a little bit what social ecological systems from a very anthropocentric perspective are. They are very often perceived as a kind of buffet where you can feed your resources, where we serve our hunger according to all the resources we want to have. And the question is, do we care for the nature, for the landscapes, for our history, for our environment? Are we aware that we should take care? Because otherwise, this buffet will disappear. And also, how equal is the access to this buffet? What should we learn for the future, and particularly from whom? You mentioned this indigenous local knowledge. Very often we ignore it. And this means that we deplete our resources in an incredible way. So I do not want to start speaking about future. I want to go a little step backwards. Global challenges. So we had them already, the Millennium Development Goals. It was only 8. Eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal health, combat HIV and AIDS, malaria and other diseases, ensure environmental sustainability, and develop a global partnership for development. I think not many will remember. I started in 2000, where these global goals were starting actually with my scientific career. And to be honest, as a scientist, I was not aware that we have these development goals. So what did we learn, or what was the approach that we had 25 years ago? The Millennium Development Goals were foreseen as an integrated framework to halve poverty by 2015, as agreed by many UN member states. I would say we didn't reach this. Absolutely not. The global demographic trends already at that time demonstrate that ever-increasing urbanization, which I enjoyed very much today, translate into key development challenges at the local sphere. And the question is, did we reach these goals? And if we go at some publications from that times, even if the Millennium Development Goals would have been achieved, the world will and does still face unacceptably high levels of hunger, morbidity, mortality, and illiteracy. And if we ask ourselves right now, is this different from 15 years ago? I would say no. Global targets can be drivers of change, and maybe they have been. The debate about the post-2015 framework, and that was a publication, I show you the reference later on. At that time, the post-2015 framework should not have been about the usefulness of global targets, but about their improved architecture and enhanced relevance. And finally, there was already a need, and I took in brackets what was the really comment, to formulate the Millennium Development Goals more clearly as global targets to maintain their measurability, to focus on ends, to embed equality of opportunities, to include interim targets, which we still do not do, and to conduct the global summitry differently so as to make it better fit for purpose. This is a publication from 2017, and we see didn't make progress so far. So have we learned something from these former Millennium Development Goals? What happened since then is that we try to develop an extended number joint development goals, 17 instead of 8, even if the evidence to reach many of them is not ensured based on the experience with the NDGs. Global challenges such as climate change, global change, and particularly biodiversity losses became much more evident since then. We can them feel every day, but they are only very loosely included. And some processes such as urbanization, as I see it here in India, were not taken up as being threatening our life on Earth, despite they do. So what we see, if you look on global trends, is, of course, more catastrophes. We suffer from them every day. Forest fires, drought and the breakout of insects, extreme rainfall, dry spells, flooding, extreme weather events like hail. So this is what we experience daily. And sometimes I think we adapt to this and think, okay, this is normal life. It is not. It is a phenomenon that we provoked, yeah, and that will even increase in dramatic development. But we don't look at it, we simply accept. There are, of course, some international agreements, international finance flows, and this is somehow stubborn, to develop or to support developing countries increased by 28 billion US dollars per year. And if we look at what would really be needed, this is somehow a joke, yeah. A progress towards the Glasgow Climate Pact to double at least the financing for development countries was made. But even if we achieve the Glasgow Climate Pact, this would only contribute to reducing to 5% the real finance gap, which is estimated to be 187 to 359 billion US dollars per year. This is the number we have to speak on, and not on 28 billion US dollars. And I like that much the title of this UN report, Come Hell and High Water. So yes, we are driving to hell, and high water is what in many regions is experienced, which destroys lives, which destroys landscapes, which destroys anything. The uncomfortable situation that we have, US leaving the international treaties, geopolitical conflicts, I speak of Ukraine and Russia and some other areas, climate change, and this is also a trend in my country, is lost out of public perception. So we had the elections very recently, and people were asked why they vote for the more nationalistic and conservative parties. Why? Because of migration and economy. Climate change to fight was on the least priority for people to vote. And we see this in the election results. And this is something that worries me a lot, because this would be where people should engage and commit, but they don't. So what about sustainability? If you speak of sustainability, of course, one trend is very relevant, and these are the tremendous losses of biodiversity. 1 million of species going extinct. And the species, of course, do not know how to react. So it's us that should have an answer. What should have been done, or what should we do in the future? And even if you do not feel worried, you might live in an urban area where biodiversity does not really count to the experience of your daily life, but it destroys the daily life basis: food, health, water, energy. All this will be lost if we continue to really extinct biodiversity at the same level as we do today. And I like much that graph that was designed by colleagues of mine. So we see already, this is the black curve, this tremendous loss of original biodiversity, which contributed to the quality of our life. And there would have been, I pronounce would have been, an opportunity to bend the curve if we continue not only to increase conservation efforts, but at a more sustainable production and consumption. Only if these three parts are fulfilled, we might not restore the same level of biodiversity as we had it before, but we can bend the curve and return to a level which is more positive. If we continue, and this is done by most countries only with conservation efforts, we will not stop this loss. We might stabilize biodiversity at a very low level and only where conservation is practiced. And even there, to be honest, most of the areas where we do conservation are too small. They are not connected. The landscape is fragmented. So there will be an ongoing loss. And if we do right, we do it now, gray curve, definitively, we will lose the basis of our life. Yeah. And this means that we are somehow between this decision, will we go for global health, for One Health, or will we, get away from regulatory services? Will we try to replace them by technical efforts? I can tell you, this will be heavily costly, and only few countries will be able to pay for. And still, if we look at the situation, so this curve was designed for a situation in 2010. So the development went on. We have to pose the question, is the world community still willing and able to bend the curve? And if so, since the losses were going on, if so, how to do? And this is something I cannot answer. Only strong efforts will help to really get back to a situation where our lives are not threatened. And it's not our lives, it's your individual life, the life of your children, of your grandchildren. So think about that. Some trends that are, of course, averse to conserving biodiversity lay in the critical increase of the world population. We see that until 2050, we are expecting to have 9.5 billion people on Earth. Afterwards, we see the simulations, the scenarios are a little bit related to more uncertainty. Maybe if we have good luck, it will stabilize somewhere at 10 billion people. This is definitively very high. We have some additional trends. If you look at the different age cohorts represented by these different fancy colors, we will see that if we go until 2100, a majority of the population will be in the cohort between 25 and 64, but we have an increasing cohort of people beyond 65. What does this mean? Elderly people have different diets. They have different needs. They need more care, more energy, more efforts. Yeah. And this will mean that sustainable production and consumption are somehow not possible with this development. Yeah. And this is somehow what happens at all countries. And I can show you for India, I searched this, 10 in the morning, there's a kind of worldometer. I can only recommend it. It's interesting to see. So we see the total population at 8:10 a.m. So meanwhile, it's larger. And we see in India, there is a very strict increase. Yeah. But at the same time, if we look at the yearly population growth rate, there is a shrinking rate. This means the increase is something additional, but people become older, also in India. And I looked for some more numbers to show you. So mid-2025, the Indian population is estimated to be 1,500,000,000. 63,865,525 people. Let's check. Yeah. So 1st of June or 30th of June, we can make a check. So this is equivalent to roughly 18% of the world population. India is still the number one, or became the number one in the list of countries. I'm not sure if you should be happy about that. 37% of the population right now is urban. The median age is below 30 years. But if we look, and I mark these two rows, the scenarios for the median age and for the urban population until 2050, we see 2050, the median age might be already almost 40, and the urban population will be more than 50%. And this urban population will be elder. So you will face a lot more problems to provide the resources to protect the people and to provide the care for them. Yeah. So this is a world trend where often we think, yeah, India has a large young population right now. But if you go back to the curve before, yeah, on the right side, you see this younger population is shrinking. Don't forget about that. We have these problems already in Europe, and we do not know how to care for our elderly people because families are destroyed. Yeah, young people are going somewhere else. And then you have somehow to solve problems that cause a lot of costs, but that are also unhealthy for the environment because you need much more resources. So as a result, the global food demand is expected to increase by 35 to 56% until 2050. But, and this is the uncertainty that we have, if particularly the development and transition countries take over our dietary demands in the developed countries, then it will be much more, 170%. And this means that also a large amount of the world freshwater resources, up to 70%, is used to produce food for the growing world population. And only to give you an idea about food demands, to produce 1 kilo of grain-fed beef, you need 30,000 to 50,000 liters of water. So this is an amount you should have in mind. This is why I personally like not to eat beef such much, but more to adjust my living style. But for many people, this is not manageable. Is this the only trend to observe critically? Definitively no. So here I have again some numbers of UN and FAO. 60% more food are needed to feed 9 billion people. 10 billion, we have not yet estimations. This means a 90% increase of the water consumption in agriculture. But I ask, how trustworthy are these statistics? And other statistics at UN level show that it might be a little bit different. So if we look at the water used for irrigation, this is this green bar at the lower part of these overall compound bars. We see that at global level and also at the level of the BRICS, these are the transitioning countries. You can see that the left side, that irrigation demands might even be reduced until 2050. But there's a lot more water demand for domestic use, for manufacturing, and for electricity that exceeds way the increase or the trends for food production. So again, urbanization and the change in lifestyles needs to non-sustainable consumption and non-sustainable production. And if we look particularly at electricity, where we try to find a way out to have less demands, this is unrealistic. I have here put some red lines. It seems that the developed world at least tries to reduce the consumption in electricity. But if we look at all the states that are marked in blue, India, the Asian states, Africa, Middle East, the rest of the world, Latin America, China, we see an increasing demand. Maybe China seemed to have stabilized it on a very high level, of course, compared to all other countries. But if we take the compound annual growth rate with a reference date in 23, we see that until 2050, an increase of 11% is expected. And this is critical because many countries have left atomic power. We do not want to use any more fossil fuels. So where should this electricity come? We cannot cover the whole land with solar panels. We cannot use more water for electricity production. Wind can be used, but we cannot cover the whole area with wind power plants because this has a negative impact also on biodiversity. So the only chance we would have would be to reduce the demand in electricity. And we don't do. We will still go on to increase it. As a landscape ecologist, I'm, of course, always looking on the trends, how land cover is developing. And you see here a strand diagram. We can discuss if it is good or not. But what we see, if we look at the right side from my perspective, maybe for you it's the left side, we see that areas covered by trees, marked in green, are converted to an increasing trend to cropland, grassland, shrubland, and to other land uses. Of course, there is a little trend also to convert other land uses again to tree-covered land uses, but these are not pristine forests. Yeah, these are afforestations or reforestation, but definitively there is a loss in area of a highly undisturbed nature. On the other side, we see that artificial surfaces are pretty much increasing urbanization, and urbanization is benefiting also from cropland. So there is a kind of negative balance between food production and urban growth. Yeah. And somehow this needs to be compensated. So what will happen? We will deforest our landscapes to produce more food because particularly in urban areas, the food demand is higher compared to rural areas. And so basically we destroy the green lungs of our earth if urbanization takes over the ruling of the whole planet. And this means that at the end, we might have an environment where we cannot live anymore. I have some statistics that are based on real data, unfortunately only until 2016, but we see that some states, it's Japan, the United States, Germany, Russia, were particularly prone to increase urbanization. India was on a way up. I would say, okay, if you look at the contemporary situation, it looks a little bit different. So I tried to get from Statista some information how it looks like now. If we look particularly at the development countries, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, we see that there's more than a triple increase of urbanization since the 1950s. This is remarkable. And Latin America, it's maybe only half or 50% of increase, but definitively a lot of areas are more urbanized than ever before. And I tried also to get some statistics dependent on socio-economic pathways from the YASA. What we see on the right side, from my side, when we look at the world trends, is that many of the scenarios predict definitively an extremely high increase of urbanization until 2100. If we look at the statistics, high income, medium income, low income countries, we see there could be still some flexibility. Yeah, it depends a little bit how much we speed this. This means how much policies put emphasis on putting economy in urbanization. Still, there would be an opportunity of a slow speed. This means more areas would be kept out urbanization, but I doubt a little bit because most of the politicians want to go for urbanization because they think it's easier to rule agglomerations compared to rural areas. And at the end, we have some problems also from a political point of view with that. So if you look at the agricultural area until 2016, we see that a very high increase. But the interesting for feeding people, the interesting thing is if we look additionally at what does this mean for population. And I put here Europe in red because there I got the data, unfortunately not for all other countries. But what we see, these dark gray bars are based on historical data. The light gray bars are based on projections, some models, some scenarios. And we have also here shown by the graphs some scenarios on, let me say, governance models, order from strength, adapting mosaic, global orchestration, and techno-garden. What we see for Europe is a trend of a decrease of agricultural land use, which is different from other parts of the world. And it is related also in most scenarios, only in few, not with a decrease in the rural population. And this means that by driving further urbanization, we will have more spatial disparities. We see this already in Europe if we look at the election results. So mostly urban populations are more voting for the Green, the ecological party, because they are not so confronted with the real life, while rural populations become older and vote more for the conservative parties or for the nationalistic ones. And if we look at the last election results, take France, take Italy, take also Germany, this is a threat that policymakers oversaw for many years. They pushed urbanization without having an idea what this means to the people electing democracy. And if you leave people out, they will vote for something completely different than you usually would expect them to vote. I did a little meta study some years ago with a colleague on the impacts of urbanization on the different sustainable development goals. Of course, it's clear people go to urban areas because of education, healthcare, because they expect a better social life. And of course, there are some success examples how you can design urban areas in a way that people really can live. But we looked at many studies and we detected particularly the the Sustainable Development Goals, poverty, hunger, equality, economy, consumption, climate action, and life on land were extremely negatively affected by urbanization. So to come now to the next step, our Sustainable Development Goals, that all of you know, the next step after the Millennium Development Goals. So it was more than a doubling, 70 instead of 8. No one could me explain why this happened. The question is, did this bring up more success? And how well could these goals be addressed? And I was searching a little bit to get something on the Asian continent. I found it not explicitly for India, but there was an SDG Progress Report 2025 very recently on Asia and the Pacific. And what this report pointed out was only 16 of 17 targets are on the track. The region is lagging behind the global pace for decent work and economic growth, Goal 8. Climate action, particularly Goal 13. Life below water, Goal 14. And partnership for these goals, Goal 17. A stronger partnering with the local communities is not yet done, but would be needed. And achieving the Sustainable Development Goals would require a transformation also. And this was not so, let me say, surprising for me when I tried to find numbers. Yeah, a transformation of the statistical systems and reporting. So definitively, if you search for numbers, you're a little bit lost in transition. So that's why I took this report. So if we look a little bit more in detail beyond what I said before, there are two things that are shown. The one is the achievement of the goals shown by these blue and gray bars, and also the evidence strength, which is important in any kind of UN reporting. Yeah, do we have enough indicators to really say, okay, this is an evident trend, or there's a lot of uncertainty? So what we see, gender equality, for instance, yes, there seems to be a positive trend development since 2015, but there is no evidence. So this means the surveys are not yet available. There's a particularly negative trend, and unfortunately, it seems my bars have been a little bit changed. You see this red bar. This is climate action. Yeah. So there's definitively a negative trend, a loss of climate regulation capacity in the Asian region. There's also some not so evident development when it comes on power, justice, and strong institutions. This is again this gray bar. There seem to be some development, but it's not very strong. Life below water, this is the bluely framed area, is very lowly developed, and also sustainable cities and communities. There's no development, almost no development since 2015. So these are the big areas where in the future the Asian continent needs to work on. Otherwise, I would say the environmental situation, life quality, health are extremely threatened. Another thing that was shown by this report, survey from 30 countries focusing on the disparities among population groups in the using different SDG indicators, shows that poverty, means based on the household wealth index, and education level are most significant drivers of inequality. So better education could make the change. These factors often intersect with the location, if you think of rural, urban areas, sex, and age, and they are worsening these disparities. And survey data remain very limited in coverage and frequency, so we have critical knowledge gaps. And I think these disparities might also be a big threat for the future, because people that are not satisfied try to find something else where to orient. And this can have a very negative political impact. So what did we learn from the MDG and SDG so far? The literature analysis, and I really tried to go through, did not show any evidence that MDG goals have been met efficiently. There are some case studies, but it's case studies. There's not a global goal really reached out. Even if there were only 8 MDGs to reach, there's no real indication that there are measures to be implemented successfully. And the interim analysis of the SDG fulfillment shows very similar trends. So definitively some goals might be met to a higher or lower extent, but particularly if we think on climate, on life quality, on biodiversity, there's nothing. So some global challenges such as biodiversity losses and their huge impacts on regulative capacities are still ignored. And this is dramatic. And this should be part of future development goals. So in 2015, and to sum it a little bit up, the United Nations countries signed up to achieve 17 sustainable development goals for people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. The trend of progress toward achieving these goals indicates that none of the 17 goals may be achieved by 2030 globally. And particularly, and I like this publication, the countries that need to attain the SDGs are the most likely not to meet them. The partnership goals among countries across the globe are missed, and there's unevenness across this attainment. And an overall assessment in 2023, when this paper was published, showed that at the global level averaging across countries, not a single SDG is currently projected to be met in 2030, with the poorest countries struggling the most. So all the investments that we have done did not reach the goal. Some hypotheses that I want to test. So why did we not reach these goals? Many of these goals, SDGs, are not compatible and not realizable in a synergetic manner. Not all of the goals are subject to consented development of all countries involved. So there was a long struggle. Many of the goals remain to be too abstract to be realized, and maybe there are too many goals to achieve. So testing the hypothesis, and here I try to mark in red particularly contradictory sustainable development goals. How should further economic growth, including its impacts, go along with the protection and restoration of our natural resources? No one can answer me. Yeah. On the one side, economic growth is prioritized, and we try to shrink more and more the area where we do conservation. Yeah. And at the end, we wonder why biodiversity is disappearing. Who's involved? Who is meant by economic growth and better infrastructure, and who will suffer from disadvantages from other SDGs? So there's again this disparity in the societal development, but also across continents. Yeah. So this is something which is not well addressed. We cannot put the same expectations of economic growth and at the same time participation, no poverty, better education at all places. So there's a big gap how to bring this together. To abstract who should be the institutions and who's responsible for the partnerships, we have this uncomfortable geopolitical situation at the moment with a lot of named religious conflicts, but basically it's resource conflicts. To be honest, there are failed and declining partnerships. Even European Union, which we believed for long years to be a strong partnership, is divorced at the moment, and there is no international mandate anymore if US is leaving many treaties. Yeah, who should be responsible for realizing, for pushing the sustainable development goals? How could we contribute from a land systems perspective? So I think the strength of land system science is that we can provide concepts how to develop social ecological systems, to integrate natural processes and human value systems into a holistic framework for sustainable development. And this is, I think, something we should follow in the future: transformative research, not basic research to explain again the 11th or the 20,000th time the same natural phenomenon. We have to look really at trends and dynamics and systems. So I want to come to a framework that I'm very familiar from development research. There we talk of systems knowledge, target knowledge, and transformation knowledge. So systems knowledge means what is the case? Yeah, the basic situation, something we do very well in land systems research. But then where do we want to go? This is a question which is often not answered. Target knowledge. And finally, transformation knowledge. How should we do better and how to assess? This is definitively where we have a lot of need to invest in research. And only to give you a little bit an idea what this means, system knowledge. What is the status of the system, the ecosystems, the communities? How high are disturbances? How strong is degradation? Which key drivers are relevant? Are these external factors or internal processes? And very often we fail even in describing this well from our systemic perspective because we are focusing on too small scale entities and we don't understand what the system is. We did a little assessment of ecosystem services and biodiversity in Germany in the past 3 years, and we had to translate this knowledge to policymakers. Unfortunately, policymakers want to always have a simple solution. Yeah, tell me what to do, and can I realize this in 4 years? And how much does it cost? Unfortunately, we had to disappoint them a little bit, but we returned to a framework that is very old and comes originally from the European Environmental Agency, the so-called DIPSIA framework, drivers, pressure, state, impact responses. And we used it again because it was easier for them to understand that we have to separate between direct drivers in a systemic level, indirect drivers, which we cannot so easily influence through measures, then a report of the status and trends of the systems, effects of changes, instruments and measures. And instruments and measures are not the same. If you look at these arrows, instruments, policy instruments or funding instruments are something that can address better a very abstract level. It can also be international treaties or so. There we can address indirect drivers by measures such as changes in the land use, protection, conservation, and so on. We can better influence the direct drivers, status and trends, and also effects on our ecosystems. And of course, what we always have to look at in the analysis is the transformation potential. Yeah, is there a chance to change something, or is this chance, if you think on these Alliance for Biodiversity Development, is this chance already lost? This is the basis of our analysis. And I have to say, our policymakers were not fully happy with us because we had to tell them that many chances, many windows of opportunities have already been lost. So we can only do a little bit better. Target knowledge, which objectives should be reached. And I think what is important here is which scale is addressed. This is something we often forget if we speak about instruments and measures. So how do we delineate our system? Do we think global, regional, or local? And what will be the impact of changes at these scales? And here I want to come to a combination of two different frameworks. The one side is the impact pathway. So many of us as researchers, we are thinking in this chain of output, what are the results of our research, outcome, did we want to change? We made some transformation, and impact that we hope to get, improved systems, empowered actors. So we think linear. But the problem is we think from the situation right now. What we should do, and this is called regnosis, is to think from the desired state in the future, and then decide which steps can we make right now and maybe in a little future to achieve this status. This is often forgotten. So we try, if I come to scenario modeling, I do it quite often. We start with the situation right now, and then we look what could happen. But we don't ask, okay, what should I do? Yeah, pathways or scenarios, measures to come to what I want to have. Yeah, what are the costs? Who should be the actors involved? And this is something which I like pretty much on this concept of regnosis. It's not simply a linear thinking what happens if we do something, but a thinking of what should we do, what actually could be done. And if we come to this transformation knowledge, a key aspect is, of course, who are the actors? And there I have also a little criticism on many publications that I read in the past. Very often, my science colleagues speak of stakeholders without understanding what a stakeholder is. Not someone holding a piece of beef in their hand on a fork. I was once entitled as stakeholder with EA. So I said, yes, that's nice. So definitively what I suggest to differentiate are experts. And these should be persons that hold special knowledge that exceeds that of an average person, that are not personally concerned or interested in the decisions finally made. And examples are, of course, the scientific community, researchers, but also indigenous and local knowledge holders. Stakeholders, and we should never forget it, there are a lot of studies that prove the bias if we only rely on stakeholders. These are individuals, groups, or organizations that represent a specific, a typical interest or concern. They are not necessarily knowledge holders. So examples are NGO actors, representatives of landowner associations, of tourism, of nature conservation. They always have a stake. They have an objective to realize in a decision-making process. And finally, we have the layman, individuals that are somehow directly, indirectly affected. They have not a group interest. They are some of the people around, but they should be consulted to represent the public view, the public opinion, and insights on how the latter may vary dependent from age, from gender, from profession. And examples are, of course, the local and regional dwellers. We have also to look at which are the key processes, formal and informal, to be addressed. And of course, if we speak of transformation knowledge, this is territorial planning as a state instrument and also informal planning that happens in many countries, additionally to the territorial planning, as a societally community intrinsic consensus building on the use of land, the use of nature, on the use of resources. Definitively, we have to consider land tenure and land rights as a key for change. Who decides upon the land take? Who defines the values, and which kind of values? Are these local, religious values, resource-oriented values, a feeling of belonging to something? We discussed this, the identification with a piece of land. So that's something which should be taken into consideration. And definitively, of course, we have the general societal demands for more resources, more welfare, more economic success. But we have also to question very critically for whom and who will be the beneficiaries. So all this needs to be part of this transformation knowledge. This means we need a global societal discourse. Without a global consensus, transformation is impossible, as many global targets will continue to fail. Yeah, how to evaluate is the next aspect. I mean, transformation or transformation knowledge does not only mean we know how we could do better, but we need also to provide evidence. So what kind of criteria and indicators should be used? Of course, economic success, of whom, at which scale, but also ecological, environmental protection and integration into land management, and social justice, cultural acceptance, where and by whom. These are the criteria which we definitively need to take into consideration. And we have also to ask who's governing the success assessment, as I showed before. There might be even no institutions for that. Yeah. So who's looking on the success of the NDGs or the SDGs? There are some reports, but no one is blamed if they are not reached. How can the results be taken up by policymakers? By whom else? So looking forward a little bit, what could be the future? I think the question is, should we reduce the number of global goals to achieve? Because 17 are nice, but do we really need 17? Are 8 enough, or do we need 3 or 4? This is not yet decided. They should be less abstract, but maybe more tangible and easier to apply, to reach, to implement. There should be somehow the power to monitor, to control, and potentially issue measures to adjust if no advances, or in the case of India, even losses in the climate action are perceived. And the question is, of course, who will be the ones consenting? The states, how to involve the citizens, which legal structure, which consensus needed to build this. I tried to figure out a little bit what could be future targets. And this is definitively only mind mapping. So this is not something which is now based on longer research, but simply a try to learn from this process since 2000. So I think definitively one goal should be how to stop or at least slow down climate change. How can we adapt to climate change, and how can we mitigate climate change effects? This is definitely the most pressing issue that we might be faced in the upcoming years. Also, how could we hold the tremendous loss of biodiversity, which goes hand in hand with climate change? So if we destroy biodiversity, if we lose our forests, definitively the regulative capacities for climate change are destroyed. So both should go hand in hand. How can we overcome inequality in education and ensure a better access to knowledge? I learned it pretty much in many of the developing countries I worked. If education is not provided, people are not aware about the impacts of what they do. And they cannot vote for democracy because they are missing essential parts in their knowledge system. So only a better education, good education in a global cooperation can lead to more success in sustainable development. Justice definitively is something we have to talk about at a global level, but also handling migration. I mean, there is this forced migration due to war, but to be honest, I did some migration studies in the past years. It's, of course, often economic reasons. There are economic disparities and they motivate people. And the question is, how can we overcome this? Yeah. And not by single projects such as development aid often does, but by a better globally consented economic development. And I say development, not growth, development. And finally, adjusting resource needs, including the fossil, the mineral, and the biological resources, is needed because otherwise we deplete our resources and we inherit a world that no one wants to have as a heritage to our kids or grandkids. Yeah, and this is something we should definitively avoid from a sustainability perspective. Less abstract, I try to figure out how this could do. I would say this fails so far, since every nation, every country, every continent wants to get the maximum in terms of economic development. And renouncement is something that policymakers do not sell so easily to citizens, to say, okay, use less resources, be happy with less of what you have right now. This is a critical message. I learned this also in Germany. So I would say even the next global development goals have a high probability to not be so successfully. And I looked at something from game history. I do not know who of you is familiar with the prisoner's dilemma. You? Okay, quite some. So I try to break it down, a little bit to this question of one world or nations, So these are no prisoners, but something a bit more abstract, and to this cooperate and defect, Prisoner's dilemma in the best case is if the two prisoners are working together, the punishment of both is the least. In the best case, they even get freedom. So if one world would cooperate, there is a chance to ensure sustainable development. If it's only restricted to nations, lower level of cooperation, some might survive for time, others not. And if we have a defect at one world level, there's a very high probability that we destroy our planet without any exception. Everyone will be affected. If the defect is only on some nations, there's still a high probability to destroy the planet early, but some might be affected later. So there are only little choices that we have at the moment. And I think many of the politicians are not aware about the consequences of what they do not know. Power to monitor, control, and to govern. I looked only at the institutions at UN level. It's quite many. And if you look at their responsibilities, they are somehow very similar. They are often overlapping. And there's a lot of discourse who's responsible for what. And very often, too many are responsible for the same thing. And this would even be worse if you look at the national or European or whatever level. So I think we have one critical aspect. Governance as an approach is too complex, and is dispersed to too many institutions to make really sure that the data are available, that we have a good monitoring system, and that we know who's responsible for which decision. So this is something which is never decided. The trend is to better have more institutions. From my own expertise, I was working, for instance, in West Africa, Ghana, and Burkina Faso. I did comparative studies. Yeah, I have to stop soon. And I can tell you, overgovernance is the worst which happens. So who will be the ones consenting at the end? There's a huge need, of course, not only to involve the state, but also participatory and citizen-driven processes to come to the next global development goals. And the next step, and then I'm at the end, should be to set up a global participation process on what should be the goals after 2030 for people, for nature, and our planet. It's up to us. It's up to